Morning everyone. Welcome to Banchory West Church. My name is Greg and I am one of the youth coordinators here, along with Don, who is covering for Chloe's maternity at the moment. I just wanted to share a really quick encouragement with you this morning for my welcome. But first I wanted to introduce you to someone. Now, some of you here may know that me and my wife are very big animal lovers, and we're on our way to actually starting a zoo with the amount of animals that we've got in our house at the moment. But we have recently, in the past 6 months, added 3 animals to our home, 2 kittens and 1 puppy. And I want to introduce you to the puppy. Her name is Indy. I've got a picture of her up on the screen just now. So, as you probably can already tell, Indy is a Great Dane, and she is. So the picture on the left is when I went to see her. I think she's about 4 weeks old in the left picture, and in the right picture, I'm pretty sure she's about 3 months in the right picture. So some of you, it's quite obvious that Great Danes aren't small dogs. And if I move to the next slide, you'll see on the right-hand side is a picture of the Cocker Spaniel on the right-hand side is my mum and dad's dog, Noah, and then the black Cocker Spaniel on the left is our dog, Bally. So you can see on the right, they're all pretty similar size. And that's actually Bally's grey jacket that Indy's wearing. And then, so I think she's maybe like 4 or 5 months in that photo, and the photo on the left is what she looks like just now. That was just at Christmas time. She's almost double the size of the other 2, and she will probably be double that size that she is by the time she's fully grown. So, it is a fun household in our home. And what I wanted to encourage you on this morning is not to wait on the future. So the reason why I showed you Indy is when I decided to get a Great Dane, it was because I liked big dogs, right? So when you get this little tiny puppy and you're kind of like, this is going to be this like almost the same weight as me one day, you're kind of like, oh, I want to get to that stage right now. And also, if any of you have ever had a puppy before, the puppy stage is not the easiest stage in life. I'm not saying it's any hard. It's not harder than having a child. But I've not had any children yet, so we've found it very difficult with Bally, and considering when a puppy is the same height as kitchen counters and your dining table, yes, it can be very challenging. So when you have things like this, she knows how to open the bin, so she'll go into the bin and take out rubbish and start eating it, and you're just like, oh, I just want to get past this puppy stage. When she's like 2 years old, it'll be so easy. Why can't I just get to that stage now and just skip all this puppy stage? And that's kind of sometimes what we do in life. We're kind of like, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait for the future. I'm going to wait for things to get better. I'm going to wait for that job promotion. I'm going to wait for that relationship. I'm going to wait until things get easier. But God doesn't want us to do this. He wants us to live today to its fullest. In Matthew 6:33. But seek first His kingdom, His righteousness, all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And also in in Jeremiah. Says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And I just was encouraged by those verses this week, and not just kind of, it's easy, especially in the new year, especially in January, it's kind of, things can be a bit like, things are going slow, you're trying to start things, but they might not be like getting going straight away. It might be taking time for things to get started, and could just be like, I just wait till we get over that, get past this month, we'll get into February and then I'll be fine. No, God doesn't want us to do this. He doesn't want us to wait on the future, and He doesn't want us to miss what He has for us today. So I just want to encourage you that don't miss what God has for you today. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you that we can all be here this morning, Father, in your presence. Father, thank you for the opportunity for us to gather together as a church family to worship you, to hear your word, hear you speaking to us, and to do life with our church community, Father, and see each other. Father, I just pray for each individual here this morning and those who aren't here, Father. I just pray for the young people just now who are going through prelims. I just pray for every young person, Father, as this could be an anxious or a stressful time for them, and worrying about have they studied enough, what results are they going to get, Father. I just pray that you'll just bring your peace onto each and every single one of them, Father. I just pray for those who are without work just now, who are looking for jobs. Father, I just pray for them. Pray that you just be with them in this time, this transitional period, Father. That you just be with them and you'll help them find the right job for them, Father. Father, I just pray for those who have lost loved ones, Father. I just pray for them as they go through this time of mourning and grieving and just missing those loved ones who have passed on, Father. Just pray for all the friends and family of those who have passed on, Father. Pray that you just be with them, just show them your love, your kindness in this time, and just really be evident in their life, Father, and be obvious to them that you are with them, walking alongside them, Father. Finally, I just pray for those in this time at the start of a new year. Just pray for those who are feeling anxious about what lies ahead. Father, just pray for those who are feeling lonely, feel like they've got no one, Father. Just pray for those who are depressed at the moment, just they don't think they have anything worth going on for, Father. Just pray for them, Father. Just pray for people who are scared and overwhelmed in this time, Father, with all the uncertainty and all the things that we can worry about, Father. Just pray that you'll just lift all of these things that people are feeling at the moment, Father, and take these on yourself, and just give us your yoke, because it is easy and it's light, Father. And just pray for anyone who is feeling any of these feelings, Father. I pray that you'll just lay your hand on them and you'll just take that away from them, Father. I just pray that as we move on with the service, Father, I just pray for you to speak through the sermon, Father. I just pray going on this week, pray for each and every single person here going on, and whatever they are doing this week, whether it's with their work or their school or prelims or whatever. I just pray that you'll just be with each and every single person as we move on from this place this morning, Father. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
because I am at heart a shy person, it's difficult to make lots of conversation. Small talk is not one of my strengths. So my default, like lots of us, is to ask questions. And an easy question, or a question I come back to time and time again, forget the first slide up, is to ask someone, so what do you do? And it's actually a great question. It's a really helpful question. You can actually find out an awful lot about a person, except if you ask this question about somebody who works in the oil or the energy industry. In that case, whatever they say, whatever string of words they tell you, means nothing to me. And as it turns out, when I ask around, you ask their partner, ask their family, ask the people and their kids, nobody has any idea what it is they actually do. But apart from that, in general, if you ask somebody, so what do you do? It is reasonably helpful. I do know, however, that at the same time, although it's not a bad question, it is quite a lazy thing to sort of try and define somebody by what they do, by particularly what they work at, as if that can define a person. So that is a little bit unfair. It doesn't make it a bad question, but it's perhaps a lazy way of summing up a person. Of course, people who answer don't have to say what their job is. They might answer, I breathe, I look after my family, I like to play with Lego, I laugh a lot. Or they might talk about some of their interests. In my case then, I could talk about football, or I could talk about family, or I could talk about something like snowboarding. Sadly, next slide, sadly something that I've not been able to do. There's not enough snow quite up in the mountains to just catch at the moment. Again, when people tell me about their interests, or I tell other people about my interests, again, there's sometimes a temptation to then stereotype a person, or to lump a person into a bigger group. So when people hear that I'm interested in snowboarding, they maybe think that I like extreme sports, so they assume that you like everything else that goes around with it, so skateboarding and surfing. Now, I have tried these other things, but I haven't pursued them for different reasons. Next slide is, we were walking just a few weeks ago down at the beach, and this isn't a picture I took, but at that point there were about 25 surfers out in Aberdeen. At that point, the waves must have been just perfect. Now, when I was younger, I did try surfing. My friends and I did try surfing. Some of them persevered longer than I did. It was difficult because living out here in Banchory, you have to listen to when the waves are there on a report, then you have to pack everything in or on top of a small car, drive all the way to the beach, hoping the waves are still there, and then you have to muddle around in the waves trying to get the hang of what is incredibly different because everything is moving around. The comedian Billy Connolly has got a famous part of his act where he talks about going to the beach, he talks about going to the sea, and just being absolutely flummoxed why anybody would either go to the beach or go and play anywhere near the sea when there are so many things in and around and under the water that are trying to kill you. And his conclusion is just don't go anywhere near it. And there's actually a healthy suspicion there that is based on real facts. When I did try a few times the surfing, and I went out beyond the waves, and I'm not a great swimmer, actually the prospect and sometimes the reality of actually saying, right, I'm tired now, it's not really working, I'm going to go back, and then realising actually I'm paddling to go back, and I'm paddling to go back, and the beach doesn't seem to be getting any closer. Just a couple of times like that made me even more nervous, and eventually just sold the stuff and didn't pursue it, because with snowboarding, everything, at least the mountain is in one place, and it's fixed, and you know that as dangerous as it might sometimes be, you don't have all that underneath you going on. This suspicion, this respect for the sea and the waves and water is something humanity has dealt with, and folk who work offshore, folk who work in that kind of industry will tell us again and again about the reality of that. It's not uncommon across the world and across history, and it was no different for the Jewish people, it was no different in the ancient Near East. Next slide. There's a healthy suspicion in the time of the man Jesus of Nazareth, whose story we're hearing about in a book that we call Luke. There was a suspicion in his people, but it wasn't just based in the first century, it was based on a long history of this idea of the deep. And the deep was known as a place of chaos. It sometimes was real, but sometimes it was representative. So they had a healthy suspicion of water and the sea and everything that was underneath it. Right at the beginning of their story of God and his people, in that poems at the start of the book called Genesis. Next slide. The image is of chaos as the waters, the deep. And then God brings order to the chaos and starts the project of creation. Then throughout their story there's an image of this idea that chaos, that the waters, that the deep are there to be controlled and by God. Next slide. In their songbook, their psalms, time and time again, talk about the surging seas and the waters, and then God being able to control them, to still them, this creator God. In their prophets, that image comes up time and time again. Next slide. Where prophets like Isaiah talk again about the monsters that are under the deep, and sometimes they have names like Rahab in this case, and Isaiah. And God is the one who controls this chaos. Sometimes a reality of the waters, and sometimes the symbol of the chaos that works against what God is trying to do. Next slide. In the great story of when God heard their cry and rescued them from slavery in Egypt, the final obstacle is the water. And again, God controls the water that threatens their escape, and they're able to go across on dry land. Yet another image in a prophet, or about a prophet called Elijah, next slide, is again of God, God's power being the power that can control the water that threatens. And then as it's calmed, as it's controlled, then things can proceed. So then as Luke tells a story about a young Jewish teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, who's gathering a following and a reputation by what he says and some of the things he does, Luke then collects together some stories, and in particular he tells a story about Jesus on the side of a lake or a sea. Next slide. He tells a story where Jesus is with his followers, 12 young people that he's chosen to spend the next 3 years with him, learning everything he says and everything he does. And at this point they make a journey across the lake, they get into the boat and they fall asleep. Next slide. This lake is known as the Sea of Galilee, it's also known as Lake Tiberias, it's also known as Gennesaret. And it's not a sea as such, although it's so big that it's described in so many of these images as a sea. Next slide. Jesus has spent a lot of time in the north of the country, and particularly it's all Jewish, the places he's gone to, but now there's going to be a slight change as he's travelling across this lake to a non-Jewish side of the country. And as he does it, a storm comes up, and it's because the lake is low and the valley around is high. This is not unusual, but this one seems particularly dangerous. Next slide. So we hear that his followers who are in the boat with him start to panic. The boat is being swamped. And in fact, they panic so much that they call to him in fear of their lives. And some of them are fishermen themselves, so they're used to boats. But still, Luke tells us a story about them being in extreme danger. Next slide. They come to him and they say, "We're going to drown." They're terrified. Well, Luke's account of what happens next is very simple and very short. Next slide. Jesus simply wakes up and he rebukes, so he goes against what's happening with the wind and the waves. The storm then subsides and everything is calm. A very familiar story for a Jewish listener, where the power of the chaos, the power of the water is being stilled, is being calmed. And then Jesus has a question for his followers in his boat. He says, "Where is your faith? Where is your faith?" And as we've seen, as we've gone through the story, and as we've wrestled a bit with Jewish stories, we find that this word faith that we translate in our English is much less about ideas and about beliefs and much more about trust. Next slide. Because when Jesus asks, "Where is your faith?" he's not saying, "Do you have faith in the idea that God can sort things out? Do you have faith in the idea of who I'm starting to let you reveal who I am?" He's not asking them to have faith, to put their trust in an idea. He's asking them to put their faith in a reality, in a boat. You put your faith not in facts, you put your faith in the seats you sit in the cars you drive in the people that you rely on. And he is asking them, where is your trust in this particular situation? You've started to spend this time with me, and it's actually quite reassuring that these 12 people who he spends 3 years with so often still don't get a grip of what is going on in front of them. Next slide. They are presumably relieved to be safe, but at the same time, it doesn't say they're relieved, it doesn't say they're delighted, it says they're still in fear and amazement. And And this again is how these stories talk about that respect, that awe that people have when God is at work. And that, of course, in a very unsubtle way is what Luke is trying to get across. This is not a story about a storm that suddenly stilled itself. And this is not just a story about one particular thing that Jesus might have done as some sort of wonder worker. This is about the whole story of God and his people and the way chaos threatens what God is doing and how God can control and can win through in the end. And Jesus somehow is at the centre of that. They have been asked a question, where's your trust? But they have their own question. Who is this? Who is this who can command the wind and the waves? Who is this who can do what we know in our Jewish culture, and even if the listeners to Luke's story are not Jewish, they will know in their Greek and Roman culture that the gods in their stories were who controlled nature. Who is this who can even control the wind and the water? What Luke wants his listeners to know is that Jesus isn't just a nice teacher. He doesn't have just lots of wise words to pass on. This is God at work. This is God present. This is the God they put their trust in. This is the God who does bring order from chaos. This is the God who hears the cry and who acts. This is the God who can be trusted. And as they, next slide, wrestle with Jesus' question, where's your trust? And as the disciples wrestle with this question, who is this? I believe as Jesus reveals himself to them, as God reveals himself through Jesus and through these stories to each one of us, another question hangs about our response. Next slide. So what do you do?